Hey guys, welcome back to the course. So in this lecture, let's talk about the common personality traits of entrepreneurs. So I know a lot of you at home are taking this course because you want to know, am I an entrepreneur or can I become an entrepreneur? So in this lecture, we're going to talk about the commonly recognized traits of entrepreneurs. But I need to tell you something right up front, caveat. There are entrepreneurs of all different shapes and sizes, stripes and colors. I don't want anyone to get discouraged by the description of typical entrepreneurs because typical is not something you would ever use to describe an entrepreneur. I've seen entrepreneurs that represent every single part of every single personality spectrum. But in general, if we were to identify things you see repeatedly, whether it's a motif or the modal type of thing to see in entrepreneurs, one is confidence. Confidence is very important. It's very hard for entrepreneurs to come up with an idea and try to sell other people on it if they themselves are not confident people. Typically, people who are confident are also better leaders. It's easier to get people to trust what you're saying and follow what you're saying if they believe that you think you know what you're doing, even if you have no idea. Another common trait is that they are gregarious. They're outgoing. The reason why we see this so often is because entrepreneurship requires a lot of networking. It requires working with different types of people. It requires being good at and willing at to communicate with people that you otherwise wouldn't normally do. So being outgoing is typically an advantage. It's easier for you to go into a crowd, find a potential co-founder, find a potential investor, or find a potential employee if you're outgoing and you're gregarious. It's also the case that typically if you're an entrepreneur, people need to follow you, and they're not going to want to spend a lot of time with you if you're boring as nails. This is why so often you see salespeople become entrepreneurs, because salespeople themselves are very chatty, they're very talkative, and naturally they connect with people. So that's very often something you see. Another common trait we'll notice is that they're always more forward thinking. Now, a lot of people think about right here, right now. I go and I buy something, I think about how I'm going to eat it. Those are people that have more of a consumer behavior, a consumer psychology. Entrepreneurs typically think, I could buy this, I could flip it, sell it to someone else, and then take the profit and invest it in something else. So it's very often you see entrepreneurs who are thinking of grander schemes. They're always thinking about something that's going to happen next month, next year, next 5 years. They're usually less concerned with what they reap today. Now, there's a famous test called the marshmallow test, and a lot of entrepreneurs have attested that this is one of the key indicators of whether or not you can be a successful leader or a successful entrepreneur. The way that the marshmallow test works is they actually do it with children. It doesn't really work if you're not a child. But they take children, they set them down, and they say, I can give you 1 marshmallow today or 2 tomorrow. And then they record what they do. What people have found in the marshmallow test is that kids that choose to get 2 tomorrow, typically, on average, when you follow up with them 10, 20 years later, they're much farther along, they're earning a lot more, and they're a lot happier. So you can parlay that into understanding entrepreneurs. They're typically the people that are okay thinking, I'll take some risk and get more tomorrow. The last one I want to point out is that they're typically action-oriented. Now, what do I mean by that? Action-oriented just means as opposed to thinking-oriented or less doing-oriented. Someone who's action-oriented is more likely to just go out and do something once they have an idea, go out and try it. They're generally people that have low amounts of friction when it comes to them getting up and going and trying something. The reason why entrepreneurs typically have this trait is because it takes a lot of getting up and doing it. A lot of people set on their ideas forever. If they're not action-oriented enough, they don't actually get anything done, and it becomes an idea that sits on the shelf and gets dusty. Now, the 2 biggest things I want you to take away from this is that, one, the list I just gave you, those are generalizations. The other thing is there's a thing called survivor's bias. If you guys aren't familiar with survivor's bias means, it's that typically when we look at a group of people, let's say entrepreneurs, the traits we see of entrepreneurs will typically cluster in one area or another. It's not to say that people tried to be an entrepreneur who did not have those traits. It's the survivorship bias, which basically means that the ones who are good enough to get to the final part to still today be an entrepreneur are the ones that are visible. The people who tried entrepreneurship, maybe made all their money and then quit, you don't see those people. The only people you see are the ones that are still out there claiming to be an entrepreneur, showing off that they're an entrepreneur, and doing entrepreneurial activities. So it's not the case that you have to have these traits. It just is the case that if you looked at a general population of entrepreneurs, they typically will have these traits more than others. Now, what's less common is that you see someone who is shy, not confident, not very chatty. Typically, they're less commonly introverted. Now, if you heard the first description I gave, you probably think, well, you're just describing someone who's extroverted. If you guys aren't familiar, extroverts are people that get their energy from being around other people. Introverts are the opposite. Those are people who spend energy being around other people, and they gain energy by being by themselves. That is the case. A lot of those personality traits I described do fit extroverts quite nicely. But there are plenty of examples of successful introverts in the world. I can give you two off the top of my head. If you ever heard of Bill Gates, he's very introverted. He, for a large period of time, was the richest man in the world. Another example is Jack Dorsey. If you ever heard of him, he's a weird little bird. He started Twitter and he started Square. He's very private and he's someone that would easily be considered introverted. Okay, so that's the rundown of what you most commonly see in entrepreneurs. Keep in mind, anybody can be one. There are just more commonalities. And it's generally harder if you have the opposite of certain traits. If you're not outgoing, if you're shy, if you're not confident, if you don't have self-esteem. But the game's open to anyone. All right, see you in the next lecture.